Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, covering, of course, your Arizona Cardinals, and it is episode 498, the first of our two preview shows. Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals website, the managing editor over there, my co-host, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. It's our Week 16 Cardinals-Bears preview picks and predictions and best bets and all that sort of thing. So preview, predictions, prop bets, if we're going to go with alliteration. Seth, this game is a weird one, right? Because we're like, what are both teams? They both started terribly, and they both have kind of found their way, and both are really more looking for the future, but I don't know what to think about this game at all.
No, and, I talked with the Bears guy, and it's interesting how split. Like, I'm sure there are swaths of people that cover the Arizona Cardinals that are done with Kyler Murray, or like, they need to move on, so to speak. But it is just interesting to me how truly split the fans, the media, the experts, whatever you want to call them, in Chicago are about what needs to happen with the Bears. And it's interesting because I think these kind of like these teams have some mirror, likeness to them. Obviously, they both have the questions of the quarterback, like, do you stay or do you go? Then you have the fact that both teams have veteran wide receivers that they traded for. Now, while the Bears trade was a much, much better deal for them than, and this is not a shot at Hollywood Brown, anything the Cardinals could have done for Hollywood. I mean, the Bears got the the 9th overall pick. They're likely to have the first overall pick in the 2024 draft, and they got DJ Moore. There's a giant need at wide receiver. They both have questions along the offensive line, but they seem to have a competent enough run game. And then you get to where things start to diverge, and it's that the Bears all of a sudden have a attacking, versatile, and borderline dominant defense, while we've seen the Arizona Cardinals defense go the complete opposite way. And you look at it, and obviously this is not a move that the Cardinals were ever going to make, so it's kind of a null point, but you do look at it and you go and you kind of wonder, right? You go, should the Cardinals have made a play for Montez Sweat?
Yeah. Montez Sweat, interesting stat. He is now the sack leader for both the Washington Commanders and the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, and he's been,
he has 6 sacks, and I guess we can start right there defensively. That since Montez Sweat got there, their pass rush has improved immensely. He has 6 sacks in 6 games, and then you look at their defense just overall in the last 6 games. So we look since week 9, and they are 3-3, and they have now the first 2 games, but we're going to look at a couple of key things, is that they didn't have any takeaways in their first 2 games, but they've taken the ball away 14 times in the last 4 games, and every single game at least 3. They had 4, 4, 3, 3. Now, granted, they're only 2-2 in those 4 games, but And if you look at their defense, which was atrocious for the first 4 games, let's look at the points allowed since those first 4 weeks when they allowed 38, 27, 41, and 31. It's been 20, 19, 12, 30 to the Chargers, 24, 13, 31, 10, 13, 20. And so you look at, so they've allowed more than 20 points. They hit the 1, 2. So they've allowed 20 or fewer points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of their last 11 games, 7 of the last 10 games, 7 of the last 11. So that defense has really kind of turned things around. They don't have it before Montez Sweat. They didn't have a very good pass rush. Sweat has changed that. Their run game is number 1 in the NFL. Now, granted, the Cardinals did go up against the number 1 run defense in the San Francisco 49ers and ran completely all over them. Caveat, they didn't have Eric Armstead or Javon Hargrave. And so we do have, does have an asterisk. And so, but you look at that run defense, not only are they number 1 in yards allowed, they are number 3 in yards per carry, which is, I guess if you're looking at a run defense, I think that's probably the more important stat, because yards per game can sometimes get a little bit skewed when you're because if teams stop running the ball against you. Like the Cardinals one time had a fairly high ranking in rush defense, but were not that great in the yards per carry, and it was just simply a case that the teams were, the Cards were playing from ahead, so they didn't give up many. They didn't run the ball that often. But this appears to be what is a very good run defense, which is going to be a really tough matchup for an offense that honestly has to run the ball to be successful.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum, and there's no reason to go back into it in this game. But you've got a team that just lacks talent on the offensive side of the ball, especially at pass catcher, right? And so you have to be able to spread the field, run the ball consistently, and from there, hope that things work out the right way. And it makes it tough. I mean, this team, if they can potentially, keep things in check, their run game should be good enough that they compete, but it's not a guarantee. And so those are the things, and they need something more. They need something more from the pass catchers. I mean, that's just the reality of it.
And we'll talk more about that in the second part. Offensively, they don't have they have a good run game. Chicago's a good run game. They rank 5th in yards, 4th in attempts, and they're 9th in yards per attempt. But they don't have a dominant performer. Their leading rusher is Justin Fields with 488 yards, with Deontay Foreman at 425. Now, granted, he's kind of been their main guy. He's not been super efficient, 3.9 yards per carry. He's played in 9 of their 14 games. And so you've got Fields with 488. You've got Foreman with 425, followed by Khalil Herbert, 347. Roshan Johnson, he's a rookie, for 274. Their rushing attack is kind of varied in that sense, as opposed to the Cardinals, who it begins with James Conner, and then you get the compliments of the explosive plays from other players. But it's the James Conner game. But what do you think of Deontay Foreman as a starting running back?
I mean, he's a poor man's James Conner, if that makes sense. I mean, 6 foot, 235. He's a grinded out type. I mean, you look at his games, and if he's running for 15, 16 times, he's rarely over 4 yards per carry. And if he is, it's barely. I mean, he's got one where he was at 5.5, and that's his high for the season. The rest of the time, I mean, you look at his attempts, 21 attempts, 3.8 yards per carry, 20 attempts, 4.2 yards per carry, 15 attempts, 4.3 yards per carry, 11 attempts, 4.5. I mean, it's just, that's not his game. He's a grinded out, pounded out type of guy. Obviously, we have to take a little bit of those stats with a grain of salt because of last week. I mean, 6
carries for -6. That was like as if it were Keontae Ingram playing.
Right. And so like that, we take with that with a grain of salt. That was against the Cleveland Browns. We've seen what the Browns do. And so that'll be the thing that matters in this game is, how who gets off in the run game. And you mentioned it, you have Foreman and then you have Fields who, not as dynamic as he was the last couple of years. Obviously, injuries have really, played a part in that this year. But he's got big games still, right? He's got the 18 carries for 104 yards in their loss to the Detroit Lions. He's got 12 for 59 in a win over the Vikings about a month ago. He's got the 12 for 58 and a touchdown last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess, by the time this airs, in their win over Detroit. So it's not that he's not running or dynamic. It's just that his game, he's changing his game and trying to adapt and become a better passer. I mean, you look last year, he finished with over 1,100 yards rushing in 15 games. He in 10 games this year, he's only at, just over 400. So, you can see the or just under 500, I guess I should say. And you can see the concerted effort for him to kind of vary and change what he's doing. And he's done a nice job, and we'll talk about their passing game shortly, but he's done a nice job in doing that when you look at the fact that they don't have a ton of talent at wide receiver. I mean, something we mentioned kind of at the top, but their strength lies in their diversity of their run game. And you mentioned it. I mean, you look at these numbers and they're kind of crazy because nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, that's disrespectful, but like none of these guys none of them wow you, but like you look at the attempts. James Conner has 143 yards. He leads the Cardinals. He obviously missed 4 games, right? And so that is what it is. The next closest guy in attempts is 56 with Amari DiMercato. The next closest is Josh Dobbs with 47. But then you get, Dobbs and Keontae Ingram. They combined have 82 carry attempts. Obviously neither one on the roster, right? So from there you have Kyler 29, Rondell with 24, Michael Carter 11, Damian Williams 11. Like you just kind of have a mishmash. You look at their top 4 runners, 109 carries for Deontay Foreman, 96 for Justin Fields, obviously their most dynamic ball carrier. Khalil Herbert, 82, and you mentioned it, 4.2 yards per carry. Roshan Johnson, 60, again, 4.6 yards per carry. So, like, all of these guys have kind of been the same. I know they have some hope for Johnson. He's a rookie, so we always, kind of give those guys a little leeway. But a lot, these guys are all just kind of like the Cardinals we talked about last week. They have James Conner, right, who's, like I said, similar to Deontay Foreman, the big kind of pound it back. They have Amari DiMercato, not a bad size back in any shape or form, but very patient. You don't look at anything he does as eye-popping, right? But it's his patience and his ability to kind of find and navigate the hole. I guess that would be Khalil Herbert, but at the same time, I think he tested better than DiMercato, if I remember right. And then they have a guy, and again, I don't mean this in this negative connotation, but like they have their Keontae Ingram, right? In Roshan Johnson, the big 6 foot, 225, athletic, supposed to be very versatile back. And so you look at those things and you go, okay, they don't have just a bunch of variance or diversity in what these runners do. And so it'll be kind of interesting to see, because at the end of the day, I don't care who it is, they're all probably going to be able to run against a defense that has struggled to stop it.
Yeah. And now we get to the receivers, and the passing game it's basically been 2 guys. It's been DJ Moore, who's got 80 catches for over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns, and tight end Cole Kmet, 66 catches, 571 yards, 6 touchdowns. Those are basically the only 2 guys that Justin Fields trusts. And you've got a guy in Darnell Mooney who's super dynamic, but is kind of invisible this year, either by his performance or by his usage and the coaching staff. Like, that's a guy that we've seen be absolutely dynamic and has just not been used or not been targeted. Especially, but I mean, it's hard to do because DJ Moore he's a dog. He's an alpha. He's an absolute stud at receiver. And he's doing what we would have hoped Hollywood was doing this year, right?
Yeah, and you look at it though, he's very sporadic. I mean, he's got 5 games with over 95 yards, and then every other game he has under 70 yards. And so that's the thing is, like, when he gets off, he puts up monster numbers. I mean, you look at these games: 7 for 96, 6 for 104, 11 for 114, 8 for 131. And then we all remember, I think it was a Thursday night game when he went for 8 for 230 and 3 touchdowns, right? Like, just an insane game. But from there, you kind of look at it, and it's very pedestrian: 6 for 68, 5 for 58. And so his production, it kind of mirrors what you see out of the Bears passing attack, and that isn't really shocking when you just look at the fact that, like, they kind of go as he goes. Like, he is the engine of that passing game, and so if the quarterback gets the ball in his hands, then that's a good thing, and if it can't, then he does a nice job. Usually averages about 11 yards a catch and gets those. And if he gets 5 catches, he'll have 60 yards. If he gets 4 catches, he'll have 45 yards. Like, it's just a really interesting passing attack because, like you said, you've got Moore, you've got Kmet, and then you've got guys that just have never reached the level of success. I mean, Darnell Mooney was supposed to be the speedster, the guy on the outside, and you look at his career, and 2 years ago in Chicago, Justin Fields' first season, I mean, this is baffling. This dude put up over 1,000 yards, and then from there, he's just never been able to kind of replicate that success. Yeah. A lot of it's been health. 12 games last year. He is on pace to play in 17 games this year, but you look at it, 81 for almost 1,100, and now he goes down to 40 for 493, and this year he's averaging the most yards per reception in his career, but he's just not getting the ball. 29 catches for 409 yards, a touchdown. I mean, he's a dynamic stretch the field threat, but it just seems like it's not something that the Bears trust. I mean, they're more of a, hey, let's get the ball in DJ's hands. And then, they use Kmet, similar to what we see with the Cardinals doing with Trey McBride.
And then you look at how the Bears season has gone. Now, granted, they went 0-4, played terribly to start the year. But since then, they've been quite mediocre. They're 5-5. They're 5-5 since that 0-4 start. And I know you can't ignore the 0-4, but that's that you've got a team that is meh. Just that's a bad start. And the way they've done it is that they haven't been streaky. They've only once, after that first 4 games, only once have they lost 2 in a row, and only once have they won 2 in a row. And that was, they weren't consecutive weeks. This was before and after the bye week. And so you're going win-loss, win-loss-loss, win-loss, win-win-loss. They've been very up and down. They've been very up and down this season. And, they've also had, I think it's 3 fourth quarter 10-point leads, like fourth quarter double-digit leads that have turned into losses. And one of them happened last week against the Cleveland Browns when they were the latest victim to the eliteness of Joe Flacco. We can never forget the eliteness of Joe Flacco.
Yep, it's insane.
And so now we get to see what the Cardinals have again in a game, which is, interestingly enough, it's 2 fan bases. Now, fans always like to see their teams win, but collectively, these are 2 fan bases that wouldn't complain if their teams lost because of the draft. And so it's kind of like 2 teams that are going to compete, but should they really win? That's the tricky part. And separately, we're all Washington Commanders fans this week. I actually I do like them this week against the Jets. So crossing fingers. Washington getting one. That's one of my underdog picks for the week is a Washington win over the Jets. So let's go Commanders. Pick up that win and let the Cardinals win a game before the end of the year and not feel terrible about that ending. So yeah, coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk. Let's move on to the actual matchup, keys for the Cardinals, matchups that we're looking at, and more. That's coming up next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, talking about now the preview, the matchups, the keys. I think number one, and this is kind of goes with pretty much every week, but especially this week, the Cardinals can't afford to turn the ball over. They turned the ball over twice. They've been really good about it because they went 2 games without a turnover. They'd only had 2 turnovers in 4 games, and they turned the ball over twice last week. Kyler threw 2 picks, and he threw 2 interceptions. The Cardinals lost by 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions. And, take one or take both of those away, and you've got a very interesting game. You've got a very interesting game, which was it was a fun competitive blowout, I guess if you want to call it that. But this week, if they turn the ball over at the rate that the Bears opponents have been turning the ball over, 14 in the last 4 games, the Cardinals don't have a chance.
No, and it's going to be a long day because they'll lean on a run game that, we covered. Not great, but it's not ineffective in closing out games. And they'll, like we highlighted, they'll keep running it. I mean, they're 4th in the league in rushing attempts for a reason. And so if the Cardinals can't stay productive on offense, then it's going to be a bad game for them. The thing is with the Bears, though, is they tend to share the ball quite a bit too, right? They're 24th in turnovers given.
And they have turned the ball over 6 times in their last 4 games, including 5 in their last 3. In their win over Detroit, they didn't turn the ball over. And in fact, Jonathan Gannon talked about it yesterday, and he said that the turnover stat is really interesting with the Cardinals this year. Now, it's a money stat for the Bears when it comes to turnovers and like winning the turnover battle. Let me pull it up. I just wrote about it. The Bears, Jonathan Gannon said 4-1, 4-0. They're not 4-0. They're 4-1 when they win the turnover battle, when they have fewer turnovers than their opponent. They're 0-6 when they turn the ball over more to their opponent. The Cardinals, it's been different. They are 2-5 when they win the turnover battle, and they're 1-5 when they lose the turnover battle. So the Cardinals are an anomaly this year, but the Bears are very much in play there. And so it's pretty much it for the Bears. If they turn it over more than their opponent, if they're negative in the turnover differential, they're going to lose. That hasn't been the case for the Cardinals, but in this game in particular, that's going to be super, super important.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems obvious, right? Like you said, it seems like it's an obvious situation, but it's odd how the Bears turnovers come, right? You kind of mentioned it. You've got 6 in the last 4 games, but or let's go back, 6 in the last 5 games, but in those 2 games without turnovers, they forced 3 and won 2 of those games. The other ones, they just tend to get more turnovers. We've got the Josh Dobbs implosion game against Minnesota with the 4 turnovers. We got the Detroit Lions game, 2 weeks ago where the Lions and Jared Goff imploded. I mean, 127 pass yards. Like, what is happening? And he threw 3 interceptions. But then you go back, and it's been a while, obviously, but some of these numbers are super, super baffling to me. And you mentioned earlier kind of like their whole thing this year, but, they had 5 turnovers in a game. They caused 0 turnovers, and they lost 24-17.
That's because the Saints are no good.
Yeah, but they're going to the playoffs probably, but I agree they're not any good, but, you go to you go to their game against the Minnesota Vikings, 3 turnover the first time, 3 turnovers to 1. They lost 19-13. You go, last week, obviously 3 turnovers to 3. They lost 20-17. Like, it doesn't make sense how they can turn the ball over so much and play close games. But it's because their defense has been, like you mentioned, from outside that start of the season, their defense has been playing really well. And so those things, even though they don't match up, they make a huge difference. And so when they have the bad, when they have the big turnover games, it happens, but they tend to make up for it on defense. And you look at, and I've talked about this stat a little bit the last couple of weeks, right? The expected points. They've had 2, in those last several games, they've had 2 where they were plus, but they were barely plus. I mean, +4 and +3.7. But their defense in 3 of those 4 games, +10, +10, and +21. So, like, their defense has been borderline great the last, 3 of the last 4 games, and they're 2-2. And so, like, when your defense, we went over Montez Sweat, obviously he's the big factor in that, but when your defense keeps you in game, it's the thing that we've lamented about the Cardinals, right? Like, their offense somehow scores 29 points, but their defense gives up 45, and you're like, that's gonna happen. Like, you're
Yes.
And like they can't get the stop, they can't get the turnover, those are the things that they're missing. And so we'll see, how it shakes out this week. Have you looked, because I have not, so we're doing this live on the air, what the weather's supposed to be like this weekend?
I asked Alyssa, and it sounds like it's going to be ideal temperatures. It's going to be in the upper 40s.
Yeah, high 40s. So it's supposed to rain Friday and Monday. So, for those of you that have never lived in the Midwest, I did for 1 year. It was miserable. Those things come in quick, or sometimes they just don't come in at all. So who knows? I mean, hopefully it is clear on Sunday, because that's, you don't want to make excuses, especially early, but that's the hope, right? Because you just don't want a sloppy game on top of that. Like,
no,
we don't want to see any version of the what was it the other day, the 3-0 Minnesota win, right? Like, we don't want that
bad.
unless a 63-point barrage comes the next week, in which case maybe Jess and I'll slog through a 3-0 win or loss if they can
put up 63 against the Eagles.
Yeah, if we're guaranteed 63 the next week, then I'll be like, you know what, I'll take it. That's fair.
So if we're looking at individuals, I think we have to look at, there's some matchups now. I think number one, you're going to look at Paris Johnson against Montez Sweat, who does primarily rush over the offensive right side. We get to see Paris Johnson go up against a big-time pass rusher. That's what we're going to see. And then I think, now we have to pay attention to this, is now Chris Barnes. They're down to their 3rd starting linebacker as Josh Woods ended up on injured reserve with an injury that was not disclosed. Chris Barnes is now the guy, which means now he's been a starter before in this league. When we've seen him play, it hasn't been bad, but with a team that runs the ball pretty well, and you've got a defensive line that is depleted, and you're on your 3rd starting middle linebacker, you want to see Barnes play well in how that turns out against the running game, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a big thing. And like you said, it makes it tough, man, to really kind of grind into any of this, because you get semi-frustrated by the fact that we knew they were going to be bad. Like, there was never a thought of like, hey, maybe this team sneaks into the playoffs, right? But at the same time, it's frustrating the amount of injuries that have occurred this year at positions. I mean, Kaiser White, obviously a big one. Josh Woods, you just mentioned it, he's gone. And they, by the way, they haven't played extremely well by any means. But then, you look at it, Chris Barnes, has to step in. From there, you've got Ezekiel Turner, you've got Owen Popo, like just these guys that are having to step in, and you're just kind of like, man, this is like borderline frustrating, because it's one thing to be bad, right? But it's another thing to be bad and perpetually injured and try to like make heads or tails of what you have. Because, and it's one of those things that you and I have talked about ad nauseum. Like, it's hard to evaluate because you need 3 or 4 defensive linemen, right? You need that. But at the same time, you don't know what you have in Carlos Watkins and DJ Collier, or LJ Collier, excuse me. It's been so long, I forgot his name. LJ Collier. So like at the same time, you're just like, man, this is tough. And then you look at these other guys, right? And you're like, all right, so you assume Kaiser White's going to be back, but like, do you preferably need an actual like inside backer, and you can move him to that will inside backer position that he kind of played in Philadelphia, and he can't be the actual inside? Like, it just is, it's been super frustrating, man. And you just don't know where or how to go about it, because there just doesn't seem to be a right answer.
Yeah. The Cardinals have no sacks in their last 3 games, and the edge guys. Yeah, and going against the Bears tackles looks like you can't bank on that. However, interior could do that. Nate Davis hasn't been particularly good at right guard, and Tevin Jenkins at left guard is in concussion protocol. So I think a matchup would be able to watch is to see the defensive tackles, Jonathan Ledbetter, Dante Stills, Kevin Strong on the interior, and to see if they can generate any pressure on Justin Fields, taking advantage of that, because I don't think we're going to get it from the edge guys. We just haven't seen it. I mean, 0 sack. Again, Seth and I have as many sacks as the Cardinals do in the last 3 games. We could go back and say Jonathan Abraham and Simeon Rice are tied with the lead in sacks this season in the last 3 weeks. That's bad. That's bad.
Well, and you know what my favorite thing is that Jess has performed as well as Marquise Brown in the month of December, and I've performed as well as any of the edge rushers in the month of December, and those are always fun things,
that's always
right?
good. After that, they do pretty all right. They've done pretty all right recently in limiting massive games from wide receivers, but they've also given it up in the other way. So and I think Christian McCaffrey's a special kind of player, so I wouldn't say that we can expect a big game that way. Now, on the other side of the ball, I don't know how healthy Hollywood's going to be, but they need him on the field. They need something from the receivers, because if James Conner isn't great, they need more than Trey McBride. And I think Trey McBride's going to have a big game because that's all they have. But they need something from their receivers, and you've got your eyeballs focused on Michael Wilson, Rondell Moore, and hopefully a reasonably healthy Hollywood Brown.
Yeah, and I mean, the Bears have a very dynamic defense. I mean, that's one of the things that we talked about, and so to that, as Jess is saying, like, how are they going to respond? How are the Cardinals going to respond to this game? And the first thing that you look at, and the hard part about it, is you look at it and you go, oh, okay, well, the first thing that you know is that they have a really good corner in Jalen Johnson, a guy that's highly underrated overall by a lot of people in the NFL, but he's just been, borderline elite coming out of Utah. I think it was 2020. And he's just become a potential Pro Bowl corner, second round pick. He's done a great job, especially in coverage this year, which, makes it even more important that the Cardinals get something out of a wide receiver because this is a guy that takes away half the field. So God forbid they're like, hey, go guard Trey McBride anytime he's in the slot or anytime he's doing this. Like you're talking about an elite eraser type defensive back. Now, that's not to say that Trey won't get his still, but like it may only come when he's in line, maybe when they split him out like they love to do, and which they should do. I mean, it's phenomenal. It may be a harder road to hoe. And so, like you said, they got to, like somebody's got to show up this week. They've got to put up some numbers. They got to make some plays. They got to get open. I mean, the stat where the Cardinals have the least separation by wide receivers in the NFL is that just not such a baffling thing to you?
It's
like as dynamic and as
and completely not surprising because that's the way it's been for like the last 3 years, right?
Well, I get that, but like with as athletic as Rondell and Hollywood and Greg Dortch are, you're like, how are you guys not getting like Michael Wilson? Understand he's the guy, he's a rookie, he's trying to find his way in the NFL, but like these other guys, it's like your athleticism is your calling card. Like, how are you not creating space? And obviously we highlighted early in the season the misses to Hollywood, and that's a lot of it, right? But now all of a sudden he can't create separation because of the heel issue. That's how I think, like for you, I don't know how you feel, but like for me, that's how I know he's actually hurt, right? Because like this is a guy that was winning consistently,
right?
And
absolutely.
All the Cardinals quarterbacks were missing him, and now he physically so he's either quit, which is a problem, and we can speak to that, or he physically can't do it, which I tend to give guys the benefit of the doubt in this situation. I mean, what reason would he have to quit? He's playing for a contract, and now they're talking about like he's only going to get a 1 year, $12 million deal wherever he goes. I mean, and at that price, you might be like, oh, if the Cardinals, draft Marvin Harrison Jr., sign T. Higgins, you're like, hey, we can bring back Marquise for $12 million on 1 year and push a couple of those other cap hits. Like now all of a sudden there's literally no excuses for Kyler. Like it's time to put up or shut up, buddy. Like, and so that's why I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Like he seems hurt. He's not explosive like he was before. It's tough, man. I mean, it's tough. As somebody dealing with a leg injury, I was actually at physical therapy today, and it's crazy to think like the things that you don't expect to hurt. And my physical therapist was explaining to me, it's like, especially with tendons, it's like, and again, it's a heel, right? We have no idea what, but like it's a heel. But with tendons, that's what he said. He's like, this can take 6 months until you feel comfortable with it. And it can take 8 to 10 months until like you forget that you hurt it. And so obviously it's not as serious as the surgery that I needed, but like if it's something where it is a tendon in his heel and he's just having that nag, like, and he just doesn't feel like right, like we could be talking 3-4 months that he needs off to like heal it, and he's just trying to grind through. So I mean, it's tough. And so the other thing is, and it was something I talked about on Tuesday, which is really weird, that they still can't run screens. As good as they're running the football, you would expect them to be able to run screens because, screens come off of play action and things like that, but they just can't run them. And, so then when it is obvious passing situations, they don't have that little wrinkle to dive into. And so like you kind of highlighted, it's like, hey, chuck it up to Trey and pray, right? Like that's where they're at right now.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk a little. Let's move on to the final segment where we make our picks, our predictions, and talk some prop bets. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals talk on the web. As we close out this edition of the show, we talk about how do we think this is going to play out. Now, first, it's got a 4-point line right now in BetMGM, and honestly, I don't know how to think about this game other than I don't think the Cardinals will win. I think they can win, but I don't think they will. I think they're going to struggle just enough in running the ball, but at the same time, I don't think the Bears are going to run away with this. I think this is going to be pretty high scoring. And so And I want to see that. Honestly, I want to see the Cardinals offense working. And if the Cardinals can't stop the Bears defense, that's fine, because the Cardinals defense hasn't been stopping anyone other than Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's offense is atrocious. It's abysmal.
Yeah, and so that's the big question mark is this game one where the Cardinals offense competes against, a good defense? Obviously, not as good as they last played, but a good enough defense. And so the first thing I see is this 43 over under, man. That either screams to me that Vegas sees this being lopsided in the Bears' favor, or that there's a reason that under 43 is near plus money, because they're trying to juice up people taking the over. Because it's
like I'm thinking over.
Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking.
It's just not as good a value. So that's, it's over under 43 on DraftKings. Same thing, -4 here. The first number, or like the first thing that I really, really like, and it's one to kind of look at, and we've talked about these ladders the last couple weeks, and Jess and I have been pretty on these ladders. Justin Fields, this is on DraftKings. I don't know what the number is on BetMGM. Over 198.5 passing yards is -140. So not great. At that rate, just take him at 200 plus alternative yards. That's -120, so better. And then the ladder up to 250 is +175, plus 360. Nice. I really like that, with how bad the Cardinals pass rush has been, as Jess has highlighted. And if you go back to last week, man, there were 2 throws he made that were dropped. And I'm not even talking about the Hail Mary at the end. There's 2 throws that he made that were dropped, that you're talking about, like 300 plus yard game. You're talking about this dude looked phenomenal against the, one of the best defenses in the, like, he was close to putting on a show, and they just dropped him. So I like Fields plus 200 plus. I would go with the 200 plus. It's 1.5 yard difference. If you get hooked by 1.5 yards, I apologize. So if he only gets to 199 but doesn't get to 200, I apologize. But I would go, because I mean, you're talking, you're getting 20 points better, and -120 instead of -140.
Yeah, for me, this is plus odds, and this is simply because of his career. Kyler Murray over 1.5 touchdown passes is +170. He hasn't had a 2 touchdown game yet. The Bears gave up 2 to Joe Flacco. They gave up 2 to Jared Goff in their most recent games. But if you look at Kyler's career, he'd never gone more than 3 games without 2 touchdown passes in a game. He's already gone 5. And so I think the numbers are going to bear out. So and especially with the fact that you can get +170 on that play, I think that's a really timely one at this point.
Yeah, I like that one too. I mean, Fields is +154, so like even something crazy like taking both of them solo and then parlaying them would probably be a really nice little juiced odds situation. I'm actually looking right now, see what those numbers would be if they have those. Yeah, Justin Fields over, and yeah, +525 if you did both. I mean, because like Jess just pointed out, obviously we know that Tyler's put up numbers for his entire career, but you look at Fields the last couple of weeks, and he's got, he hasn't thrown more than more than 1 touchdown since October, and this is the defense to do that against, right?
Yes. Like I'm glad the DraftKings got him, because we don't have the alternate lines yet on BetMGM. We're looking at the straight rushing props. We've got James Conner 52.5. I do like the over on that, especially the way they're using him. And honestly, Deontay Foreman at over 39.5 seems like a pretty good lock too.
Yeah, that seems low, does it not? But
It's
the
about
the
the
one
usage, but
I was gonna say
I'd
that's the
like
one
to
thing you have to
see.
worry about.
Yeah, I think though, like, because when Baltimore came in, I said take the over for Gus Edwards as well, and that ended up playing out well. Is I'd like when the alternate lines come out is laddering the over and 50 yards for Deontay Foreman, and then kind of leave it
Yeah,
at that.
and that's plus 140, so that's a great, that'd be a great one. Justin Fields is at 56.5. Again, his numbers rushing are good, but they haven't been elite like they were before. 30, 58, 59, and then that 104-yard game. I don't know if they're going to need him to put that Superman cape on, though. That's where I get concerned. 56.5 seems like too much. I'd stay away from Fields' number altogether, but I don't think you need to, but then you look at the offense or the receiving yards. The one thing I'm looking at that really stands out is Cole Kmet. He's only 37 and a half yards. That's at minus 110 as well. You look at that. Jess highlighted obviously the injuries at the inside linebacker. Now you have Chris Barnes there. What is it going to be? Papoa? Like, who's going to be the next guy? Right.
The way they were using it before, it would be Turner, but they might go with Papo. Papo's got has found a role in their NASCAR deal in their all linebacker pass rush group. But yeah, when you add that seems Cole Kmet seems low. Honestly, Trey McBride at 59.5. Or you could go off the receptions at 5.5. Now, granted, you probably want to take some alternate line because the receptions is minus 150 for over 5.5. That's not a very good. You got too much juice on that one.
Yeah, and then the other one that I like is I like both Kmet and McBride. They're over in longest reception. Kmet's 16.5, McBride's 19.5, and I feel like that's a pretty. That's something we see from him every game. I know he averages about 10, but he usually
has one big, like a 20 plus or 19 plus catch per game.
Yeah. So, and you look at, Kmet this year, and he's had a good year, and he's hit that 19.5 16.5 in half the game. So obviously 50-50, you want higher odds, but in gambling, 50-50 is actually really good.
Yes.
So, and so you look at that, and like I said last week, he dropped one that would have been like a 70-yarder, and so, that's one that that I like personally. The numbers that scare me the most this week are the runners. I'm not worried about, like you mentioned, not super worried about James, but those, I like Deontay. I like that 39.5. Anything over gets into the 40s, the juice has to be worth it to me. And so like you said, if you ladder that to 50 plus, I think that's completely 100% worth it. But I wouldn't take anything over 50. If for some reason they move him over 50, I'd stay off of it. The other one that's always interesting, and again, if weather's not a factor, Matt Prater over 1.5 is plus 110.
Yes,
we've hit on this a lot this year. Now it's not indoors, so that's a little bit. And if they call it the Windy City for a reason, right? But with the chances of things, I like that. The other one is Kyra Santos over 2.5 point after attempts made. I don't know if it's just it's Chicago vibe from the marks or what, but I think they're going to put up, 4, maybe 5 scores.
Yeah.
And so
which takes us to our final score prediction. I've got the Bears scoring 4 times in a 28-24 win, and ending up with a push if you're going with. So if you like a close game, relative close game, if you want to slide on an alternate line, go and make it 4.5, and then take the Cardinals to cover, that would be reasonable. Right at 4 points, I'm just not comfortable either way. So yeah, I'll go with a push, and I'm just going to avoid if I bet the game, I'm going to move the line to maybe and take slightly higher juice, maybe move it to 4.5 or 5, maybe 5.5, and then go Cardinals. But any other way, I'm just going to stay away from the spread, and I think the Bears come away with a 28-24 win. It's going to be pretty high scoring.
Yeah, I've got it 31-28. The Bears take this one, but the Cardinals cover.
And with that, we'll end this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, specific of Cardinals Talk the Web. You will hear me and Alyssa on the show on Saturday, as this one drops on a Friday. And then Seth and I will come back after the Christmas weekend, be able to talk about how the Bears and the Cardinals did. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.